it's largely worth it and mostly artifact free for that massive boost in clarity and fluidity that you get with the higher frame rate. So it is worth experimenting with that too in certain scenarios.
So from my perspective, firstly to sort of come back on a couple of points you made, about sort of 3FG, 3X MFG. First of all, I think you're quite right. You've got to adjust the MFG level to suit the refresh rate of the panel, which in turn will require different factors depending on how challenging the game is to render in the first place. Secondly, if you have a less capable GPU, then you may need to use higher factors, but at the expense of latency, and obviously your base frame rate will be lower. For lower end GPUs, you require really good sort of tuning experience to actually get a good experience, I think, with MFG, because your base latency has got to be pretty decent. But, 5060 Ti, you can play Cyberpunk in, up to like 200 frames per second, and it's all about optimized settings to get there. And obviously, perhaps you wouldn't need 4x MFG, perhaps you need 3x to go to like 165. To answer the question more specifically about an unfairly poor reputation, it's a tool, it's an option. I think when it stops being an option and when it becomes a requirement, then maybe there is a lot more pushback that's warranted, depending on the quality of the implementation. I think, for example, Mind's Eye actually active already as a default. Monster Hunter Wilds, you really got to tell what both frame generations, you got to tell what frame generations like do I? And then you sort of say no, it's like, you don't really want that. It's an option, it shouldn't be a mandatory tool. However, the technology is going to progress, it is going to get better. You will reach a point where it is essentially going to max out the refresh rate of your monitor, which is taught by default. Latency will probably improve, and at that point, maybe it is worth maybe the sort of mandatory side of things, or rather sort of recommended. Probably has more merit. I think the reason it has an unfairly poor reputation is, and it does go back to those bar charts, I'm afraid. Having frame gen and multi-frame gen in bar charts and kind of suggesting that it's the same quality of experience as non-frame. Kick off with a couple actually about multi-frame generation. This one first of all from John Miser, or Misa. Hello, exclamation point. Do you guys think that MFG has an unfairly poor reputation? After re-entering the PC sphere after 15 plus exclusive years on console, my impression of frame generation when properly deployed is very positive. In December, I bought a well-priced 4070 Ti Super pre-build, but I wish I had access to 3x and 4x MFG. With current path-based games, if I can reach 45 to 60 FPS with DLSS, then 2x MFG, or 2x FG rather, increases to 80 to 100, which makes a large difference in fluidity. I personally see value in tripling/quadrupling FPS, irrespective of the popular frames sentiment. Very good thoughts. And a follow-up question from T-Money58. John, when using multi-frame gen 3x or 4x to amplifying frames well north of 200 FPS, is motion blur still needed? What do you think, John? Do you think MFG or frame generation in general has an unfairly poor reputation? I mean, I use it.
I do think
it depends, though.
It does depend. There's a lot of different use cases here. But the first thing I'm still confused by after re-entering the PC sphere after 15 exclusive years in console. Oh, he's talking about himself. I thought he was saying,
yes.
Like, wait, frame gen on console? Like, what? Because I'm so focused on that. That's funny. So, yeah, I do feel like it has gained a negative reputation. I think this comes down again to what people are looking for in their screen-based experience. For me, having more frames is always welcome, and using high refresh rate monitors, the difference is vast. Like, if you look closely, you're going to spot some artifacts with frame generation on certain types of things, but I find that far less distracting than a lower overall frame rate, because it's not just about response. To me, it's about the fluidity of motion. And when you're at these really high frame rates, it just feels better. It looks better to the eye in a way that I find extremely engaging. And you're able to essentially, like I'm playing through Doom Dark Ages again here on the PC, and you know, I'm doing 5120 by 2160 output, DLSS quality with multi-frame gen, all settings maxed out, including path tracing, and I'm just cruising along at 165 frames per second. Yes, fake frames are in there, but it looks incredibly smooth, and you get the full effect of the visuals. Artifacts I feel are relatively minimal, and it still feels very responsive to me. Now, so those are the two caveats there, right? If you're very sensitive to those, any sort of frame gen artifacts, or you're very sensitive to input latency, I'm not that sensitive. I am to a degree, but it depends on the game as well. This is gonna vary from person to person. It also depends on how you use your screen. Like after the whole switch to screen discussion, it really became clear to me that different people focus on screens in a different way. Like what they're looking at, the way they perceive things. A lot of this depends on how your brain perceives that screen as to whether you think it's worth it or not. So, but when configured right, I love it. I always use it when I can to get those extra frames. And I think it's just it's an awesome thing that really allows you to sort of punch above where you might be without it, right? As for motion blur over 200 frames per second, I would say largely no, but it does depend a little on the game. Some games use it in interesting ways that I still find valuable, but for the most part, not really, and I don't want camera motion blur over 200 FPS for sure, because when you're doing all that sort of like lateral movement, the benefit, the reason I like these super high frame rates is clarity. Because, like, say, when I use obviously OLED panels, big surprise as everyone knows, but they're still sample full displays. So without something like black frame insertion or using like the CRT beam simulator, you're still limited by persistence blur. But once you start to hit these high refresh rates, so I've been doing a lot with that 333 hertz mode on this monitor lately, and like it's to the point where I feel like it exceeds most black frame insertion strobing implementations that I've seen, and you just get like really crystal clear motion that feels ultra smooth, and it's incredible feeling. I love it, and that's so motion blur actually gets in the way of that at those frame rates. I just played through Sigil 2, the Doom mod from Romero, at 330 hertz on there, and it's something I can't get enough of. So yeah, but that was native frames, right? Frame generation, multi-frame generation achieves that same level of fluidity. The caveats being just some slight artifacts, I would say, if you look very closely, usually around UI stuff.
Okay. What do you sit on this, Oliver?
I mean, I think MFG is great, but I think MFG is really well for higher refresh rates, and right now at the moment, I have a 144 hertz monitor and a 144 hertz television, and I personally don't feel that's appropriate for FG, not MFG.
Oh yeah.
Occasionally, but on those displays, I really don't ever feel the need for MFG necessarily. I think it would be different if I had one of those great 440 hertz monitors, or something even higher refresh rate, like a 360 hertz or 480 hertz monitor or something like that. But I kind of think in those cases you can kind of MFG up to refresh rate and just kind of let it sit there. But on my kind of display, I feel like I generally am operating without FG at all. When I am operating with FG in extreme like capture scenarios, I only use FG. So 2x. So yeah, I think MFG does make a large impact. I think we saw that at CES with Alex. Some of those titles with MFG on a nice 240 hertz OLED look incredible, but I don't think that applies necessarily to every single kind of display out there at a single refresh rate.
I can say that it's interesting that it's slightly lower but still reasonably high refresh rate, as I did find one from 120 hertz max up to 165 max in the 5K mode on this newer monitor. did allow multi-frame gen to become usable, whereas at 120 hertz target, it was basically unusable to me. The artifact was too severe, and the latency increased because the base frame rate lowered enough, where 3x frame gen to 165 is actually very, very usable, and minimal artifacts. But one thing I didn't mention is the sort of the non-smart frame generation, like what Lost in Scaling is doing. This is also something I've been playing around with a lot lately, specifically with 2D pixel art games and other 3D games that don't. It's like the smooth motion from NVIDIA, but I feel like Lost in Scaling does an even better job these days with its current 3.1 iteration. For something like, for instance, playing through Sonic Mania again, I stumbled over the ultra-wide mod for that game, so I could fill the whole screen with the increased field of view, but it's a game capped at 60 frames per second, right? Adding in lossless scaling frame generation does increase that fluidity to 120 frames per second, or 240 if you're doing basically multiples of 60. You get the full benefits, and it genuinely looks like it's running at a higher frame rate, not just like a frame interpolated. Now, certain types of pixel patterns can cause some artifacts, but I felt like it's largely worth it and mostly artifact free for that massive boost in clarity and fluidity that you get with the higher frame rate. So it is worth experimenting with that too in certain scenarios.
Hola Lau, mi nombre es Alfredo y te quiero preguntar, si tuvieras que describir a México en 3 palabras, ¿cuáles serían y por qué?
Mi corazón te diría las 3 razones por las que yo me quedé en México: jacaranda, cumbia y tequila. Pero, como imagino que eso es no lo que preguntas, te voy a decir otras. Voy a utilizar adjetivos. El primero te podría decir asombroso. México es asombroso. Asombroso tiene varias acepciones en el diccionario porque viene de sombra y es como acercarse, acercar algo que estaba en la sombra y ponerlo sobre la luz. Eso es asombroso. Y a veces la oscuridad da miedo, por eso asombroso puede ser algo que da miedo. Pero asombroso también puede ser algo que te sorprenda por desconocido. Y para mí México fue un descubrimiento por desconocido y por todas las cosas asombrosas, maravillosas, surrealistas, que es una palabra que se relaciona mucho con México y donde además lo ves cada día. No hace falta que tengas una vida interesante, no, tú sales de tu casa y ya es todo intenso. México me parece tantos Méxicos, que definir México en una sola palabra es imposible. Pero está el ocre del desierto, está el azul del mar, está el verde de la selva, está el gris del concreto, está el rojo de esa arquitectura colonial, está el naranja de sus frutas, es colorido. México tiene color. El rojo mexicano y el azul de México. Es un azul maya que viene de una arcilla que se llama Atapulquita, puede ser, mezclada con índigo. Y eso, cuando los españoles llegaron a México y vieron las pinturas, la época colonial, cuando ustedes se fijan en esos cuadros que hay un azul que no se podía recrear en Europa. Todo el barroco, todos esos pintores, ¿no? Pero un azul mucho más apagado. Porque el azul que se utilizaba en pintura, en el arte, realmente de Afganistán, el lapislázuli, era muy caro. Entonces estaba reservado para obras que tuvieran que ver con la realeza, con cuestiones religiosas arriba, pero la gente común pues, se lo pensaba mucho porque era muy caro. Y además era el único que no se deslavaba, los demás se deslavaban, se iba por el sol. Cuando llegaron a México y vieron esas pinturas que había aquí con ese azul fuerte, chillón y vivo, dijeron, ¿qué es esto? Y entonces se dieron cuenta de que había una manera de mezclar esa arcilla y que no solamente era un color mucho más vivo, sino que duraba más. Y eso lo dio México. Ese Antoni, del que México debe ser el gran protagonista, tiene esos dos colores que son tan característicos. Mucho más allá del verde, blanco y rojo, me parece que el rosa mexicano y el azul de México, azul maya, es maravilloso. Entonces es colorido, tiene color. Eso me pasa con México. Y la tercera, yo diría vivo. Hay una manera de sentirse vivo en este país que yo no he encontrado en otros lugares. La viveza que tienen en el lenguaje, cómo usan el lenguaje en México, es una cosa que me enamoró y dije, no, yo me tengo que quedar en este país porque 6 meses no he empezado ni 1% de lo que yo quiero aprender. Y si yo me quiero fijar en las palabras y soy tan amante de las palabras, este es el sitio, ¿no? No solamente como ver todos los modismos y los regionalismos, sino cómo juegan, cómo está vivo siempre. Esta manera en la que tienen en México, digo tienen, porque yo me considero mexicana, no lo he dominado, aunque ya he dado un pasito más adelante de dan rodeos y pues como de, tengo que decir algo y ni siquiera sé de qué estamos hablando. Y si tú observas una conversación, el otro te va, o sea, hay un dominio de los silencios y de las pausas. Es como, ¿algo quiere decir esto? Que no sé, yo no lo sé. Pero los mexicanos sí lo dominan y son capaces de llegar a un acuerdo con ese silencio. Y uno se siente perdido. Y eso me parece que es un privilegio y un lujo que ustedes tienen, porque es una manera de apartar a los demás de no, si no sabes hablar este idioma, ni te metas. Y esa riqueza, esa viveza que tiene el lenguaje a mí me seduce mucho y me atrae mucho, es muy adictivo. Y la manera que tienen de festejar, la manera que tienen de saludarse, la manera que tienen de acoger a todo el mundo a su casa y es como, no, ven y come, ¿no? Te invita a Año Nuevo, aunque no te conozca de nada. Me parece que es una manera de celebrar la vida diario, que a veces es un poco agotador, pero es muy fácil entrarle a eso, es muy... Yo quiero ser parte de eso. Yo diría que vivo, con todas las connotaciones que esa palabra que vivo, tendría que estar en esa lista de 3 y me la pusiste muy difícil porque te seguiría diciendo 27 más, pero creo que me quedo con esas 3 y con jacaranda, tequila y cumbia.
So, from my perspective, first of all, to sort of come back on a couple of points you made about sort of 3x MFG. First of all, I think you're quite right. You've got to adjust the MFG level to suit the refresh rate of the panel, which in turn will require different factors depending on how challenging the game is to render in the first place. Secondly, if you have a less capable GPU, then you may need to use higher factors, but at the
That looks worn. I can fix it. This thing looks like it's been through hell.